My son Augustus in the street one day was feeling quite exceptionally merry. A stranger asked him, "Can you show me, pray, the quickest way to Brompton Cemetery?" "The quickest way? You bet I can," said Gus, and pushed the fellow underneath a bus. Whatever people say about my son, he does enjoy his little bit of fun. In 1898, a 24-year-old lieutenant in the Coldstream Guards, ADC to the Governor-General of Canada, wrote a collection of 41 short verses. Each of them was only a few lines long, but to a lot of people they were the funniest few lines they had ever read. They were called Ruthless Rhymes for Heartless Homes. Their author's name was Harry Graham.
Billy, in one of his nice new sashes, fell in the fire and was burnt to ashes. Now, although the room grows chilly, I haven't the heart to poke poor Billy.
Father heard his children scream, so he threw them in the stream, saying, as he drowned the third, "Children should be seen, not heard." For the next 30 years, Harry Graham produced volumes of comic verse and stories, and in the 20s and 30s collaborated on over 40 West End shows as either writer or lyricist. Some of his songs became quite well known. This one, for instance.
You are my heart's delight, and where you are, I long to be. You make my darkness bright, when like a star you shine on me. Shine, then my whole night do. Your light divine bids me hope anew that dreams of mine may perhaps come true, and I shall hear your whisper, I love you.
Richard Tauber singing You Are My Heart's Delight from Franz Lehar's The Land of Smiles. English lyrics by Harry Graham. And by the way, all the lyrics you'll hear in the programme are by him. Something I underline because I think you may be as surprised as I was to discover so many famous songs with Harry Graham as their lyricist. But for a young lieutenant from an upper-class background destined for a traditional career in the service of his country, comic verse and working in the theatre was, well, dash it, not quite the thing at all. His daughter Virginia Graham.
Of course, his father, my grandfather, the clerk of the House of Lords, used to write marvellous songs. I remember him as a child. He was blind by that time, but he used to sit at the piano singing away the songs that he'd composed. So that's where the talent came from. And then, of course, everybody said to Harry, dear boy, you can't do nothing but write. Pull yourself together. You must go on doing something else. So he went on being a soldier. But didn't like it a bit.
He was born in London on the 23rd of December 1874 and christened Henry Jocelyn Clive Graham. His elder brother Ronald followed the family tradition, was knighted and ended up as British ambassador in Rome in the 1920s.
O'er the rugged mountain's brow, Clara threw the twins she nursed, and remarked, I wonder now which will reach the bottom first.
Their father was Sir Henry Graham, KCB, a leading barrister, and as Clerk of the Parliaments lived at the Palace of Westminster. Their mother was Lady Edith Gaythorne Harley, daughter of Disraeli's War Secretary, the first Earl Cranbrook. Harry was educated at Eton and Sandhurst and was commissioned in 1895 as a second lieutenant in the Coldstream Guards.
He looked like a Coldstream Guards officer, which he was, you see, to begin with. And he still had this moustache, turned up moustache. But my very, very early days, when I was really tiny, he used to wear a terrible sort of moustache thing at night, you know, to keep it flat, or turned up, to keep it looking beautiful. But that he gave up quite soon. And his suits were pretty shaggy, really. And his pockets were bulging with matches and handkerchiefs. so he wasn't all that very tidy.
In 1898, he was promoted to lieutenant and appointed ADC to the splendidly named Gilbert John Elliot Murray Kinninmont, 4th Earl of Minto, the new Governor-General of Canada. But it was clear that his heart lay in the entertainment business. Miles Kington, humorist and fellow Graham enthusiast, takes up the story.
I think he must have known deep down that all the time he was going to gravitate towards this sort of thing, because although he went to Eton and Christchurch, Sandhurst, all these places, and ended up as the ADC, the Governor-General of Canada, you think, well, next step, Prime Minister. You've got to remember that all the time he had actually sort of been living in a world, end Victorian, beginning Edwardian world, where sort of musical and light entertainment was sort of part of the air. And he turns out to be a great amateur putter-on of entertainments. And even when he went to Canada, or especially when he went to Canada, and you read Lord Minto's diaries, Lord Minto being the Governor-General, he's always on about Harry Graham's shows. Excellent, tremendous success, he keeps writing. And in 1904, the last one, Bluebeard, ran for 3 evenings. And the Governor-General's diary described it as Harry's greatest triumph. Now, there's not the words of a man describing an ADC. It's a man describing a future sort of writer for the stage.
Lord Minto was clearly delighted with his ADC, writing to his wife,
Harry, quite awful. Makes me hysterical. He's so amusing. He loves all the girls, and they all adore him. I don't think he really much cares for camp life, but he is an excellent companion.
Harry continued to write at every opportunity, including a diary of a trip to the Klondike.
That, too, looks rather beguiling. I mean, obviously he went across Canada to protect the Governor-General from the public, and vice versa. And there's one paragraph I came across which shows that things haven't changed. At 11 a.m., the train is boarded by a representative from a Vancouver paper who desires an interview. His visit is not successful, but this fact does not deter him from expressing an intention of publishing an imaginary interview all the same. This is today's Fleet Street.
The diary also includes a typically disarming self-portrait of Graham himself. A Scotchman by birth, an Englishman by occupation. Quick of imagination, slow of decision. With the ambition to succeed, but without the necessary energy to success. Not sufficiently interested in life to be an enthusiast, not disinterested enough to be a humanitarian. Impatient of stupidity in others, unconscious of it in himself. With the highest possible animal spirits, dominated at times by profound melancholy. A dilettante with a turn for writing inferior doggerel, a taste for literature, an ear for music, a retentive memory, and a prodigious thirst. Well, this dilettante with a turn for writing inferior doggerel also wrote the Ruthless Rhymes during his tour of duty in Canada. More followed in 1930, and in the late 1940s, Victor Healy Hutchinson set a number of them to music. 21 were recorded. A Healy Hutchinson setting of Ruthless Rhymes conducted by the composer, all of the notes, none of the jokes. In 1901, the newly promoted Captain Harry Graham went to South Africa, but again it was obvious that he preferred bashing a typewriter to bashing the Boers. According to the regimental record,
he beguiled the monotony of his 2-month stay at Bridgetown by taking over the local newspaper offices and issuing the Bridgetown Bugle, a periodical printed entirely by volunteers, assisted by some youthful compositors who knew no English.
In 1904, Graham resigned his commission and became private secretary to the great Lord Rosebery. 2 years later, he left that position to become a full-time writer, contributing to Punch, Century Magazine, The Graphic, and The Observer, amongst others, and providing a daily humorous column for the short-lived Tribune.
A funny poem? No, my friend. Though loath to set your ardour cooling, I cannot honestly pretend to deal in that peculiar blend of literary fooling which other bards, for love or money, express in verse that's frankly funny. Bid me compose a stirring song, my rhyming lexicon I'll lug out and tell of how to right the wrong. Heroic conscripts, stern and strong, came leaping from their dugout and taught the Hun to be less honey. But do not ask me to be funny, or bid me praise the lads that roam the salt sea waves with such devotion in submarines beneath the foam, who seem to feel as much at home in the Atlantic Ocean as monster fish, e.g. the tunny. But do not ask me to be funny. Implore me, if you must some day, to write you verses sad and serious, a sober, quaint, old-fashioned lay, a ballad sentimental, say, or tragic and mysterious. But if you prize my friendship, sonny, don't ever ask me to be funny.
But they did keep asking, and he kept complying. More books of comic verse appeared. In 1906, a collection called Misrepresentative Men. It was dedicated to the American actress Ethel Barrymore, sister of John and Lionel.
My father was engaged to Ethel Barrymore, and they got quite far advanced towards the wedding. I think he even got a house in Bedford Square. And then she went back to America to settle up her affairs, and it all proved too much for her. She couldn't face it. So my poor father, I think, went tearing after her, to no avail. So back he came.
There's a girl you may meet who has wings on her feet, and she looks very sweet, slipping round the corner. Yet you know at a glance if you give her a chance, she will lead you a dance, slipping round the corner. She has a fast note so fast she goes flying, there's no denying she'll leave you sighing. Every chance is her name, life for her just a game, but beware all the same, or you'll find your left behind. She's slipping round the corner.
Slipping Round the Corner from the 1931 stage production of The Good Companions, with music by Richard Addinsell. And that was Adele Dixon, accompanied by John Gielgud. Well, Ethel Barrymore might have slipped round the corner, but in 1910, Harry Graham married Dorothy Fraser, widow of Captain Hugh Fraser of the Coldstream Guards and daughter of Sir Francis Villiers, the British ambassador in Belgium. Josie Collins singing Love Will Find a Way from the original 1917 London production of The Maid of the Mountains. Harry acquired a stepdaughter, Kitty, with his new wife, and together they had another daughter, Virginia.
Well, I remember him as a perfect father, you see, because he was always funny. And of course, in those days, one doesn't see a great deal of one's parents. And so it was always a terrific treat to be taken out by my father. And they were very dear parents because they loved each other and they loved me. I had a lovely childhood. It was full of laughter, full of love.
Late last night I slew my wife, stretched her on the parquet flooring. I was loath to take her life, but I had to stop her snoring.
As well as the comic verse, there were the once popular Bolster Book and Lord Bellinger, as well as The Perfect Gentleman and The Complete Sportsman, Guides to Social Aspirants, which purported to be compiled from the occasional papers of his friend Reginald Drake Biffin. They offered advice on all manner of gentlemanly pursuits, from how to catch an alligator and how to behave in the bathroom to how to write an autobiography.
The rules for reminiscence may be summarized in a small space as follows. Make a list of all the celebrities, crowned heads, actors, and minor royalties you have ever met, and of all the private letters ever written to you by persons too long dead to resent their publication. Collect all the chestnuts you have ever seen attributed to Sheridan, Sidney Smith, and other wits. Sprinkle the celebrities with the chestnuts, garnish with dead letters, stir with a gossipy pen, allowed to stand for some months in a publisher's office, and finally serve up hot in an attractive cover.
Advice to letter writers was also included, of course. For example, this model letter from a nurse at the seaside about her charges.
Madam, I regret to inform you that the twins fell off the cliff last Friday. I forgot to mention this in my last letter. Master Eric was very stupidly allowed to go bathing yesterday all alone and has not yet come up for the third time. Baby is very well, though for the moment I cannot lay my hand upon her. I put her down on the pier this morning while I went to look at the pier rose, and when I came back she was gone. But I dare say she will turn up again soon. I thought you would like to hear my news, though I fear it is rather dull. Yours respectfully, Matilda Wallop.
But while most of his writing gently mocks his own class, some of it has a nice cutting edge, as in perspective.
When told that 20,000 Japs are drowned in a typhoon, we feel a trifle shocked, perhaps, but neither faint nor swoon. Dear me, how tragic, we repeat. Ah, well, such things must be. Our ordinary lunch we eat, and make a hearty tea. Such loss of life, with shame I write, creates no loss of appetite. But when the paper we take in describes how Mr. Jones has slipped on a banana skin and broken several bones, good heavens, what a world, we shout. Disasters never cease. What is the government about, and where are the police? Distraught by such appalling news, all creature comforts we refuse. Though plagues exterminate the Lap, and famines ravage Spain, they move us not like some mishap to a suburban train. Each foreign tale of fire or flood, how trumpery it grows beside a broken collar stud, a smut upon the nose. For charity, alas how true, begins at home and ends there too.
In 1914, at the age of Captain Graham rejoined the Coldstream Guards and went to war.
I was playing golf the day that the Germans landed. All our troops had run away, all our ships were stranded, and the thought of England's shame altogether spoilt my game.
It was very extraordinary, and he used to, every year, have terrible nightmares about the time of Ypres. Wasn't that strange? And he never would think why until he suddenly realized it must have been about the time of Ypres. These things are so strange, aren't they, really?
In the last year of the war, he was ADC to Major General Ponsonby in France. In 1919, he was demobbed and said goodbye to the army forever.
Goodbye, it's time I sought a foreign clime, where I may find there a heart more kind than I leave behind. And so I go to fight a savage foe, although I know that I'll be sometimes missed by the girls I've kissed. In some Abyssinian French dominion I shall do my bit and fall for the flag if I must. Where the desert sand is nice and handy, I'll be full of grit. You won't see my heels for the dust. I'll do or die, you'll know the reason why when told of all Leopold's last stand for the fatherland.
Goodbye from Robert Stoltz's White Horse Inn, sung by Joseph Locke, lyrics again by Harry Graham. And it was the theatre that now preoccupied him in another change of direction. He still produced the odd volume of comic verse, but he was much in demand as a dramatist, lyricist, and adapter.
My father used to sit in a sitting room in Gloucester Place, absolutely wreathed in smoke, I'm afraid, and writing his lyrics in a little sort of squiggly writing all the way down the middle of the page like that. And he used to write all the morning, and my mother used to kick him out. At lunchtime he used to go to the Gag Club every day, then come back again in the afternoon, go on writing. And occasionally he used to, when I was in my teens, he used to call upon me to come and help him. which was too exciting for words, you know.
What do you mean help him?
Well, find a rhyme for him or something.
He also collaborated with some of the great names of the theatre, such as Seymour Hicks, Frederick Lonsdale, Douglas Furber, and Harold Fraser Simpson. His first venture into the West End had been as early as 1901 with Little Miss Nobody, followed in 1914 with State Secrets and A Southern Maid in 1917. Then, from 1920, for the following 12 years, he produced on average one play and the lyrics for one musical each year. In 1923, for instance, he had 6 shows running in London. Amongst his successes were Madame Pompadour, starring the young Evelyn Leigh, The Land of Smiles, White Horse Inn, Victoria and her Hussar, Our Peg, and The Good Companions, all rather more successful than this fictional theatrical production described in his last book, The Private Life of Gregory Gorm.
The green baize curtain was then lowered, the piano was lifted down into the auditorium, and the audience sat back and prepared themselves to enjoy the pièce de résistance, namely the performance of part of a Shakespearean play by the Stuckbury Mothers Dramatic Society. The play chosen was Henry VII, Part 2, one of the less known of Shakespeare's masterpieces, remarkable for the intensity of its dramatic power and for lack of any suggestive lines calculated to embarrass an uneducated audience. It was not proposed to present the entire play, but only the famous scene in Act 3 where King Henry VII unexpectedly meets Queen Isabella of Castile on the battlements of Wigan Castle. During the interval, while the stage was being set, Miss Trumpet took her seat at the piano in the auditorium and played The Merry Peasant, a piece which, in the opinion of many modern critics, marks the high watermark of Schumann's genius. Gregory, who was acting as stage manager and producer with many willing fellow workers, was busy behind the scenes, and not more than 25 minutes or half an hour can have elapsed before he put his head through the curtain and signaled Miss Trumpet to stop playing The Merry Peasant. She had already played it 17 times, and many of the more musical among the audience were beginning to know it by heart. The scene disclosed, as could be learnt by a glance at the programme, was the battlements of Wigan Castle, the battlements themselves being represented by several rows of flower pots containing calceolaria, and the castle by a piece of linoleum carelessly draped over 2 step-ladders at the back of the stage. When the curtain rose, King Henry VII, Mrs. Bromwich, and Queen Isabella of Castile, Mrs. Firmage, were discovered. Mrs. Firmage was supposed to run across the stage and clasp Mrs. Bromwich round the knees in a frenzy of amorous passion. Mrs. Bromwich was to see her coming, and with regal dignity stalk downstage to avoid seduction or other unpleasantness. Unluckily, 2 of the tabletops which constituted the apron stage had not been fastened securely enough to the trestles provided to support them. Under the combined weight of King Henry and Queen Isabella, they gave way, and before anybody could save them, the 2 principals had been precipitated headlong into the front row of the stalls.
The king's horses, the king's men, march down the street and they march back again. The king's horses and the king's men. They're in scarlet, they're in gold, all dollied up, it's a joy to behold. The king's horses and the king's men. They're all out to fight the foe, you're fighting so, but oh dear no, they're out because they've got to go, to put a little pep into the Lord Mayor's show. It's a duty, now and then, to march down the street and to march back again. The king's horses and the king's men.
The King's Horses, sung by the Big Four and written by Harry Graham and Noel Gay for the 1930 show Folly to be Wise. One of his last musical collaborations was Casanova, a confection of Johann Strauss arrangements. This is its most memorable number, with Graham's perhaps less memorable lyrics, The Nun's Chorus. 1932, Harry Graham broadcast a short extract from one of his poems from Savoy Hill. It is the only known recording he made.
Of all my aunts, and I have 8, a varied and a choice collection, the 2 I chiefly venerate and view with most affection are spinsters. Need I say I mean Aunt Flora and Aunt Geraldine. They might have married, I'm assured, but in their youth were too fastidious, and later, when their charms matured, men found the task invidious of choosing which of 2 to woo, when either equally would do. But still, no loveless life was theirs. With shrieks of happy girlish laughter, they oft discussed their heart affairs, for they were much run after. Though men are made of craven stuff, and none would run quite fast enough.
Harry Graham died on the 12th of October 1936. His passing prompted a lengthy obituary in the Times and a leading article, which included that observation which has so frequently been the death knell of reputations: his work will not soon be forgotten.
It is given to few writers to produce work which so truly and spontaneously reflects their personalities that thousands of readers who have neither seen nor met them seem to know them like personal friends. Harry Graham enjoyed, in every sense, this peculiarity. His prose and verse were himself, for his talk, slow and almost melancholy in its manner, but always scintillating in its matter, possessed the same quality as his written words. He hated ostentation, pretense, and self-advertisement in all its myriad modern forms, and pinked them ruthlessly in rhyme. He used to boast that the only photograph of himself that had ever appeared in the press was one of him with his gifted daughter Virginia. The legend beneath ran, Miss Graham and friend.
What I liked especially about him was the sort of feeling of this slight acid tone, the sort of that anyone could dare to make so many deaths occur in so few lines and get away with it. And he put it in such a smooth verse. You could never see the joins in his verse at all. The rhymes are wonderful. And it goes sweeping on. You can never detect the effort at all.
When Grandmamma fell off the boat and couldn't swim and wouldn't float, Matilda just stood by and smiled. I almost could have slapped the child.
Something foreign about him, or some of his early stuff. This sort of is slightly cruel or pretend cruel streak is something we're not very used to in English. Now, I think Harry Graham is perfected a kind of English cruelty, which is quite sort of overwhelming, but doesn't actually hurt you. It doesn't quite fit in. He's a sort of little enfant terrible who who you actually secretly prefer to everyone else.
There are only 3 works of Harry Graham still in print: Ruthless Rhymes, published by Edward Arnold, the journal of his trip to the Klondike, and a recent anthology called When Grandmamma Fell Off the Boat, both published by Methuen. There is room for much more, for he is in the great tradition of Lear and Carroll and Gilbert and Belloc. At his best, he easily ranks at any of these, and their works and reputations have been well served. It's time for a Harry Graham revival.
There's been an accident, they say. Your servant's cut in half. He's dead. Indeed. Please send me the half that's got my keys. It's dreadful, isn't it? Wonderful. Gorgeous callousness.
The Ruthless Rhymer was written and presented by Jeremy Nicholas, with readings by Clive Swift and contributions from Virginia Graham and Miles Kington. The producer was Paul Mayhew Archer.
I had written it to Aunt Maud, who was on a trip abroad, when I heard she died of cramp. Just too late to save the stamp.